Alexander strode into the bustling factory floor, the sharp scent of machinery and heated metal clinging to the air, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the denim-clad workers weaving through conveyor belts. He had come to finalize a business inspection, though his mind was elsewhere, restless with a tension he couldn't name. As he navigated the industrial labyrinth, his eyes caught a young woman meticulously adjusting the gears on a complex assembly line. Something about her drew him in, a sensation he had never experienced in his vast life of acquisitions and boardrooms. Her hands moved with precision, yet her posture hinted at a quiet struggle against exhaustion, a story written in the lines of her shoulders. And then it happened. He froze. The moment his gaze lingered, he noticed the crescent-shaped birthmark peeking from beneath her sleeve. A detail so small yet so impossibly familiar that his heart clenched. Amara. Or at least, the resemblance was so uncanny that he dared to think it. Memories of Serafina, her laughter, her first steps, the way she used to clutch his hand with trust flooded back, a tidal wave that pushed him against his restraint. His mind spun, calculating the impossibility, trying to rationalize the fact that this factory worker, worn and worldly, could be the reflection of the daughter he had lost 23 years ago. Amara wiped the sweat from her brow and glanced up, her dark eyes meeting his, carrying a mixture of wariness and curiosity. Alexander's throat tightened. "Excuse me," he began, his voice almost trembling despite his usual composure. You remind me of someone very dear to me." She tilted her head, her gaze softening but laced with caution. "I get that a lot," she said with a quiet smile, and something in the tone, a hint of vulnerability intertwined with strength, deepened his fascination. He couldn't let this pass as coincidence. Over the next few days, Alexander found himself returning to the factory under the guise of corporate oversight, though every encounter with Amara felt like peering into a mirror of a life he thought was gone. He learned about her struggles, raising her elderly adoptive grandmother, facing subtle discrimination from colleagues, and battling exhaustion that came not only from long hours but from carrying invisible burdens. Each story she told, every detail of her day-to-day life, contrasted sharply with his opulent world of private jets, gala dinners, and vast estates. Yet, in her simplicity, he saw resilience he had forgotten he admired in his daughter. The tension inside him grew unbearable when he asked casually, almost fearing the answer, "Do you know who your biological parents are?" Amara's eyes darkened, her grip tightening on the edge of the workbench. "I was adopted," she whispered, almost reluctantly. That single word sent shockwaves through Alexander. Could it be possible that Lila, his ex-wife and Serafina's mother, had gone to such lengths to protect his daughter? Could this girl, standing before him with grease-stained hands and determination in her eyes, be the child he had mourned for over 2 decades? Questions crowded his mind, each more urgent than the last. He had to know, but fear clawed at him, fear of shattering both their lives if he was wrong. Late one evening, he found himself walking through the factory parking lot, the cold wind whipping against his coat, thinking about the years lost, the lullabies he never sang, the birthdays that passed unnoticed. Amara emerged from the building, her eyes wary, carrying a toolbox as if it were armor. Alexander stopped her gently. "I need to know your story," he said softly, almost pleading. She hesitated, studying him with an intensity that made him pause. Finally, she sighed. "There's a lot you don't know," she admitted. He nodded, understanding that trust would not come easily, but the connection was undeniable, etched into every gesture, every curve of her face. That night, he left with more questions than answers, yet with a determination that burned hotter than any business deal he had ever pursued. In the days that followed, Alexander observed her discreetly, learning the patterns of her life, the small acts of kindness she offered co-workers, the way she carried herself with dignity despite hardship. He became painfully aware of how much he had missed, how much he had failed to protect, and how fragile the line between coincidence and destiny had become. And then, a name emerged from old contacts, whispers from a past he had buried, Lila. Memories of his ex-wife's fear, her sudden disappearance, the untraceable trail of protection she had orchestrated, now threaded through every detail of Amara's existence. Every moment he spent in her presence was a delicate dance with revelation and hope, with the thrilling possibility that fate had returned a lost fragment of his heart. One rainy afternoon, he found himself standing outside Amara's modest apartment building. Lightning illuminated the cityscape, reflecting off the wet pavement, and for a moment, he allowed himself a fantasy of reunion, of reclaiming what had been stolen from him. She opened the door, startled by his presence. "Alexander," she questioned, a note of cautious recognition in her voice. He smiled, a fragile mixture of relief and anguish. "I think you might be my daughter," he confessed, the words heavy but liberating. Amara blinked, uncertain whether to laugh or cry, whether to accept a truth that felt as impossible as it did inevitable. That night, the rain fell harder, washing over the city like a cleansing promise. And in the echo of its rhythm, Alexander felt the first real pulse of hope he had dared to believe in for over 2 decades. The story of a father recognizing his child in the unlikeliest of places was not gentle or simple. It was layered with confusion, longing, and the treacherous terrain of emotions long buried. Alexander returned home that evening with a restless heart, haunted by the striking resemblance, the crescent-shaped birthmark, and the undeniable pull of fate. Every memory of Serafina surged forward, the sound of her laughter in sunlit rooms, the bedtime stories that he would never get to tell her, the feel of her hand in his, and he realized that this was more than coincidence. It was a life demanding attention, a chance for redemption, a possibility to rewrite the past without erasing it. Every encounter thereafter deepened the enigma, each conversation a delicate weaving of past and present. Alexander began piecing together fragments of information, subtle clues in Amara's life that hinted at a carefully orchestrated protection plan, likely spearheaded by Lila to shield her from dangers he had long feared. Yet danger loomed even in these moments, a shadow of unresolved vendettas that clung to his empire, waiting for a slip, a misstep, a moment of distraction born of joy. He understood the stakes. This was not merely a reunion. It was a prelude to a storm that could engulf everything he had built and everything he hoped to reclaim. Alexander's days blurred into a tense rhythm of discovery and dread, each one carrying the weight of a past he thought he had buried. Amara had agreed to meet with him in private. Her curiosity mingled with caution, and as they sat in the quiet corner of a city cafe, the hum of life around them seemed distant, almost unreal. "I need to understand," Alexander began, voice low and deliberate, "why you were placed where you are, why you were kept from me for so long." Amara's fingers twisted a napkin, a nervous habit he recognized immediately, echoing the gestures he remembered from Serafina's childhood. "It wasn't safe," she said finally. "There were people who wanted to hurt you or anyone connected to you. My mother, she wanted to protect me." The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. Lila, his ex-wife, had orchestrated this entire separation to shield Amara, his daughter, from danger rooted in his own past dealings. Memories of the courtroom came rushing back, of the day he testified against the Romano crime family, of the fear that had coiled in his stomach as Salvatore Romano was sentenced to prison. And now, after decades, the threat had not disappeared. It had only grown more cunning. Antonio Romano, Salvatore's brother, had taken up the mantle of vengeance. Alexander realized that each act of protection Lila had taken was a lifeline, a delicate chain of safety that now threatened to break. Amara's life, though simple on the surface, had been precarious for years. Her adoptive grandmother's health was fragile, the factory an unforgiving environment, and the subtle discrimination she endured had made her resilient but wary. Yet despite these challenges, she had built a quiet, extraordinary life. Her skills in engineering were exceptional. She had developed machinery improvements that increased productivity, yet no one above her noticed, the higher-ups blind to the brilliance before them. Alexander was amazed, not just by her resemblance to Serafina, but by her strength, intelligence, and moral compass, traits that had survived hardship and neglect. "You're remarkable," he said quietly, almost afraid to speak too loudly. "And I need you to know, you've always had a family that loves you even if you didn't know it." But even as hope stirred, danger was tightening its grip. Alexander began receiving threats. Subtle, insidious messages slipped into encrypted emails, warning of consequences should he continue to pursue or reveal the truth. Then came the more direct attempts. His trusted associate Marcus nearly lost his life when his car was rigged to explode, a thin line of warning carved into Alexander's life by Antonio Romano. The billionaire understood the stakes had become lethal. Protecting Amara would not be a matter of conversation or reconciliation. It would be a battle against cunning, ruthlessness, and the shadows of past mistakes. He could not allow the Romano vendetta to reach her, to turn the fragile life she had built into a disaster. Amara, keenly aware of the threats, became a crucial ally in planning their defense. "I know how to counter their plans," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. "I've studied their operations, the weaknesses in the systems they think are foolproof. If we act strategically, we can protect ourselves and take control of the narrative." Alexander watched her, a mixture of admiration and concern overwhelming him. She wasn't a victim. She was a partner, capable of outmaneuvering those who sought to manipulate and destroy them. Every conversation with her reinforced the truth. She was Serafina, not just in appearance, but in intellect, courage, and spirit. Tension escalated as Antonio's attacks grew bolder. Alexander discovered that contracts and assets he had relied upon were under scrutiny, attempts to destabilize his empire subtly designed to coerce him into submission. Amara's interventions, technical expertise, and analytical mind revealed vulnerabilities in Antonio's schemes that even Alexander's decades of experience had overlooked. Together, they began dismantling threats piece by piece, anticipating every move, countering with precision, and navigating the treacherous game of survival and revelation. In this crucible, Alexander realized that the strength he had always sought in allies existed naturally in his daughter, resilient, clever, and fiercely protective. Lila's memory loomed over every decision. Alexander imagined her fear, her determination, her sacrifices to keep Amara safe, and he understood the depth of her love. This realization steeled him. The empire he had built was secondary to the family he could reclaim. With each new threat Antonio unleashed, from financial manipulations to targeted intimidation, Alexander's resolve only grew. Amara's knowledge and courage were instrumental. She exposed the instability in Antonio's plans, turning his schemes against him, forcing the criminal mastermind to reconsider his pursuit of vengeance. Together, they transformed fear into strategy, dread into action. Their bond deepened as they worked in tandem, a father and daughter reunited not just by chance, but by survival. Late nights in Alexander's office turned into strategy sessions, discussions of risk and contingencies blending seamlessly with shared laughter and fleeting stories from the past. "Remember when Aunt Beatrice tried to bake cookies at midnight?" Amara asked one evening, a small smile tugging at her lips. Alexander laughed, the sound rusty but genuine, as memories of family warmth seeped into the cold, calculating world they navigated. These moments reminded him of what he had almost lost, what he could now protect, and the life they could build together. The climax of their confrontation with Antonio came swiftly. Amara's insight into his operations, combined with Alexander's resources and determination, cornered him. A contract meant to strip Alexander of his company was torn up in a decisive, symbolic act, signaling the end of Romano's threats. Antonio, forced to retreat, understood that the game had shifted, the father-daughter duo was unbreakable, and the past's grip had loosened. In that moment, Alexander felt a profound relief, tempered by the knowledge that true safety required vigilance, love, and unyielding unity. The days following the showdown were quieter, though no less intense. Alexander devoted himself to rebuilding what had been strained or lost, particularly the bond with Amara. Their conversations became more personal, filled with laughter, gentle teasing, and the cautious exploration of emotions long suppressed. "It's okay to feel everything," Alexander told her one evening, as they watched the city lights shimmer through rain-streaked windows. Amara nodded, recognizing the truth in his words, understanding that vulnerability and strength could coexist in a life rebuilt from chaos. Alexander's empire, once a fortress of power and wealth, began to transform into something more meaningful. A network designed to protect, empower, and reunite. He dismantled dangerous connections, severed ties that thrived on fear and corruption, and focused instead on creating stability and hope. Through it all, Amara remained his equal partner, her intelligence, courage, and emotional insight guiding decisions that balanced strategy with compassion. They had navigated a storm together, emerging not just unscathed but stronger, their bond deeper than either had dared to imagine. Alexander stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly before him, reflections of the battles fought and victories claimed shimmering in the glassy streets below. Beside him, Amara leaned slightly, her hand brushing his in a gesture both tentative and intimate. The journey to this moment had been fraught with peril, revelations, and emotional upheaval. Yet here they were father and daughter, reunited not merely by resemblance or blood, but by courage, trust, and shared experience. The memories of the past, both painful and protective, lingered like shadows, yet the present offered a chance to rewrite what had been lost. Alexander inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of responsibility ease just slightly, replaced by a quiet, radiant hope. Their mornings began with gentle routines, small domestic rituals that grounded their lives in stability. Breakfasts with fresh fruit and lightly toasted bread became moments of connection, the clinking of utensils and the aroma of coffee a comfort they had both longed for. Alexander watched Amara move through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, marveling not only at her skills, but at her demeanor confident, warm, and unpretentious despite the trials she had endured. "You've got this," he said, offering reassurance for a task she had mastered countless times before. She smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling with amusement, recognizing the familiar pattern of encouragement that mirrored her own quiet strength. In these everyday moments, Alexander understood that family was not merely defined by wealth or legacy, but by shared presence, trust, and the willingness to support one another through life's challenges. Alexander dedicated himself to dismantling the remnants of danger that lingered from the Romano vendetta. He liquidated risky investments, severed alliances built on intimidation, and redirected his influence toward projects that could benefit vulnerable communities. Amara's insights proved invaluable, particularly in engineering safer systems and identifying vulnerabilities that had once been exploited by enemies. Together, they created a strategy not only for personal security but for broader impact, the foundation they would establish to reunite separated families, inspired by their own experience. Each decision was deliberate, informed by compassion and wisdom, a testament to their resilience and shared commitment to justice. Evenings often found them in the library, poring over old letters, photographs, and documents left behind by Lila. Alexander had never truly appreciated the sacrifices she had made, the intricate measures she had orchestrated to protect her child, until now. Amara, too, processed these revelations, sometimes laughing softly at the cleverness of Lila's methods, sometimes pausing with tears in her eyes at the depth of maternal love that had shielded her. "I understand now," Amara whispered one night, the candlelight casting a warm glow over her face. "She loved me enough to risk everything. And we're finally here, together." Alexander reached out, holding her hand firmly. "And we'll honor her," he said, voice resolute. "We'll live the life she envisioned, not in fear, but in courage and love." Their relationship blossomed in unexpected ways, each day an exercise in trust, forgiveness, and joy. They revisited parks Alexander remembered from Serafina's childhood, sharing stories of moments lost to time, weaving a tapestry of memory and experience that strengthened their bond. Amara introduced Alexander to friends she had known from the factory and the neighborhood, bridging the gap between his opulent world and her grounded reality. Together, they laughed, teased, and reminisced about small, tender moments, like late-night cookie mishaps and childhood pranks, allowing love and levity to infiltrate spaces once defined by loss and fear. The foundation they established became a beacon of hope, dedicated to reconnecting children with parents, providing support for families fractured by circumstance or danger. Alexander saw in it a purpose greater than wealth accumulation, a legacy of empathy, justice, and compassion. Amara worked alongside him, her engineering expertise and organizational skill ensuring that the initiative operated efficiently and humanely. Their collaboration was seamless, each complementing the other, a partnership forged not only in shared trials, but in a profound understanding of the value of love and trust. In quiet moments, Alexander reflected on the journey, the sudden shock of seeing Amara, the terror of facing Enzo Romano's threats, the painstaking process of unraveling hidden truths, and the exhilaration of confronting danger together. He realized that his greatest achievements were no longer measured in boardroom victories or financial gain, but in the restoration of family, the nurturing of love, and the reclamation of a life nearly lost. Amara, for her part, discovered not only the depth of her own resilience but the enduring presence of a father who, despite time and distance, had never stopped caring. They shared victories small and large, successful interventions to stop Romano's schemes, reunions with estranged family members facilitated by the founder. And profoundly, each triumph reinforced the lesson that love and communication were powerful forces, capable of bridging decades of separation, fear, and uncertainty. Alexander often found himself gently reminding Amara, "It's okay to feel everything, all at once. You've earned every moment of this life." She would smile, leaning against him, comforted by the authenticity and depth of their bond. As time passed, the shadows of the past receded, replaced by a life enriched with purpose and connection. Alexander and Amara cultivated a home filled with laughter, understanding, and warmth, a sanctuary where every conversation, gesture, and shared glance reinforced the strength of their relationship. They navigated the complexities of healing, forgiveness, and rediscovery with patience and grace, aware that the future, while unpredictable, could now be approached with hope rather than trepidation. In the final confrontation with lingering threats, Alexander and Amara stood united, no longer reacting out of fear, but with calculated courage. Antonio Romano's schemes had failed, dismantled not just by strategy, but by the unbreakable bond between father and daughter. The tearing of the contract, symbolic and decisive, marked a turning point, a reclamation of agency, family, and integrity. Victory was no longer measured in dominance or power, but in love, protection, and shared triumph. Their story, though born from danger and deception, ultimately became one of redemption and hope. Alexander's empire shifted from a realm of cold wealth to a platform for meaningful change. Amara's brilliance and resilience honored and celebrated, and Lila's memory preserved as a guiding light. Together, they built not just a life, but a legacy. One of courage, compassion, and the unyielding power of family, demonstrating that even after decades of loss, it was never too late to reclaim love, restore trust, and rewrite destiny. Moral lesson: life often presents us with loss, danger, and uncertainty, yet love and family remain guiding lights even in the darkest moments. Patience, courage, and empathy allow wounds to heal and relationships to flourish. Alexander and Amara's story reminds us that protection, trust, and open communication can overcome fear and adversity. True strength lies not in wealth or power, but in resilience, understanding, and compassion. It's okay to feel vulnerability while forging connections, and even after years apart, hearts can reunite, hope can be restored, and families can triumph, teaching us that love and redemption are always within reach.